There's a guy I knew who ran a small manufacturing business in Ohio, made decent money, saved aggressively in his 40s, hit about $400,000 in his 401k by the time he was 52. Then something shifted. He stopped caring about his monthly contributions. Not because he gave up, because he did the math and realized his portfolio was growing faster than he could possibly save. The market handed him $40,000 in gains 1 year while he was scraping together $20,000 in contributions. He looked at those numbers and thought, what am I even doing here? His money was officially working harder than he was. That's the moment we're talking about today. The exact mathematical crossover point where your contributions stop mattering, where compounding takes over and you're basically just a passenger watching your wealth multiply. Most people think you need to keep grinding until you're 65. That's nonsense. The real question is, when does your portfolio become self-sustaining? When can you stop? Today, I'm walking you through the precise mechanics of that moment, why it happens faster than you think, and how to engineer your life around hitting it as early as possible without being reckless. Here's what we're actually going to cover. First, I'm going to show you the mathematical moment when your portfolio's annual growth exceeds your annual contributions. That's the crossover point. Then, I'm going to walk through what happens if you stop contributing at different stages, because understanding that trade-off is how you figure out if grinding for another decade is worth it, or if you can ease off earlier. We'll look at something called coast fire, which is basically the art of front-loading your suffering so you can coast for decades afterward. And finally, I'll give you the milestones along the way, so you know you're on track, and not just throwing money into a void hoping it works out. This isn't theory. I've got multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars invested across taxable accounts, retirement accounts, real estate. I've watched this crossover happen in my own portfolio. I've seen the psychological shift when you realize you're no longer the primary driver of your wealth. Think of wealth building like pushing a massive stone wheel. Early on, you're doing all the work. Every paycheck, you're shoving money into the system and the wheel barely moves. You're exhausted. You're wondering if this is even working. But here's what happens if you keep at it. The wheel starts to spin, slowly at first, then faster. Eventually, it's spinning so fast that your pushes barely add momentum. The wheel has its own energy now. That's compounding. That's the crossover point. And once you hit it, the game changes completely. You're no longer pushing, you're just making sure you don't get in the way. Let me show you the exact numbers. Say you're investing $20,000 per year and capturing a 7% annual return. When you have $100,000 invested, that 7% growth gives you $7,000. Your $20,000 contribution is still doing most of the heavy lifting. You're the engine here. The wheel is barely moving on its own. But watch what happens as the portfolio grows. At $300,000 invested, that 7% return generates $21,000 in growth. Now, your contributions and your growth are roughly equal. You're sharing the load with compounding. The wheel is starting to spin faster. This is where things start to get interesting. At $500,000 invested, 7% growth gives you $35,000. Your $20,000 contribution suddenly looks small next to what the market just handed you. Compounding is now the primary driver. You're the passenger. The wheel is spinning on its own momentum. And at $1 million invested, 7% growth generates $70,000. At this point, your $20,000 contribution is basically a rounding error. The portfolio has taken over completely. Here's why this matters psychologically. I remember reading about a study where they tracked people's savings behavior over decades. Early on, people felt like they were pushing a boulder up a hill. Every paycheck, scraping together money to invest. And it felt slow, frustrating, like nothing was happening. But somewhere around that $300,000 mark, depending on how much they saved, the boulder started rolling on its own. They weren't pushing anymore. They were watching, and their entire relationship with money changed. The anxiety decreased. The urgency shifted. They realized they'd hit escape velocity. Now you might be thinking, contributions always matter. Every dollar compounds over time. And technically, yes. But what we're identifying here is when the burden shifts. When you stop being the primary driver of your wealth and compounding becomes the star of the show. I've seen people hit this point and continue contributing anyway, because they're on autopilot, which is fine, but they're doing it out of habit, not necessity. The portfolio doesn't need them anymore. That's a profoundly different psychological position. The beauty of understanding this is it gives you a target. You're not just blindly saving until 65 hoping it works out. You're aiming for a specific dollar amount where your money starts working harder than you do. And once you hit that number, you have options. You could keep contributing and accelerate your timeline. Or you could ease off the gas and let compounding do the rest. The choice is yours. But here's where most people get confused. They don't understand what happens if they stop contributing at different points along the way. So let's stick with our example of investing $20,000 per year at 7% returns. If you keep contributing without stopping, you hit $1 million in about 23 years. That's the baseline. 23 years of consistent contributions and you're a millionaire. Not bad. But what if you stopped at $100,000 invested? It takes you 5 years to build up that $100,000 with your $20,000 annual contributions. If you stop there and let compounding do the rest, it would take another 35 years to reach $1 million. That's 40 years total from when you started. So stopping at $100,000 cost you 17 extra years compared to the baseline. That's a brutal trade-off. You're not even close to escape velocity yet. The wheel isn't spinning fast enough. Now, let's say you push to $300,000 before stopping. That takes about 11 years of contributing. From there, compounding alone needs another 18 years to carry you to $1 million. That's 29 years total. You just cut the timeline down significantly. Stopping at $300,000 only cost you 6 extra years compared to never stopping. 6 years might be worth it if you desperately need breathing room in your budget. The wheel is spinning at a decent pace now, and here's where it gets really interesting. If you grind until you hit $500,000, that takes about 15 years of contributions. If you stop there, compounding doubles it to $1 million in just 11 more years. That's 26 years total. You're only 3 years behind the baseline of contributing the entire way through. Think about that for a second. You could stop investing entirely at $500,000 and only delay your $1 million milestone by 3 years. That's the power of reaching critical mass. Once you're at that level, compounding is doing so much work that your contributions barely move the needle anyway. The wheel is spinning so fast that your pushes are nearly irrelevant. This is why the crossover point matters. It's not just some abstract concept. It's the moment when you can make a real choice. Do you want to keep grinding and shave off a few years? Or do you want the freedom of not having to scrape together $20,000 every single year? For some people, those 3 extra years are worth the trade-off. For others, they'd rather keep contributing and hit the goal faster. There's no right answer. It depends on what else is happening in your life. Maybe you want to start a business and you need capital. Maybe you want to take a lower-paying job you actually enjoy. Maybe you're burned out and you need to coast for a while. The key insight here is that the further along you go, the less your contributions matter in relative terms. This brings us to one of the most powerful frameworks in personal finance. It's called Coast FIRE. And it's basically the art of front-loading your suffering so you can coast for decades afterward. Here's the concept. You save and invest aggressively early on until you hit a specific number where compounding alone will carry you to your retirement goal without you contributing another dollar. Once you hit that number, you stop. You're done. The portfolio is on autopilot. You can take a lower-paying job you actually enjoy. You can work part-time. You can travel for a year. Whatever. The pressure is off because your retirement is already handled. The wheel is spinning fast enough that it'll reach your destination without you. Let me walk through the math. Say you want $2 million by the time you're 65, and you're 30 years old right now. If you can capture 7% annual returns, how much do you need invested today to hit $2 million in 35 years without adding anything? The answer is $187,000. That's your Coast FIRE number. If you hit $187,000 invested by age 30, and you never contribute another dime, compounding alone gets you to $2 million by 65. The math just works, and that changes everything about how you think about your 20s. Now, is hitting $187,000 by 30 realistic? For some people, absolutely. If you graduate college at 22 with no debt, land a decent job, and live like you're still in college for 8 years while investing aggressively, you can hit it. I knew a software engineer who did exactly this, lived with roommates until he was 30, drove a 10-year-old Honda, maxed out his 401k and Roth IRA, threw everything else into a taxable account, hit 200,000 by 31. Then he quit his high-stress job and became a freelance developer working 20 hours a week. His retirement was already handled. For others, it's not realistic. Maybe you're starting from zero at 30, or you have student loans, or you live in an expensive city, but even if you can't hit the exact number, the framework is still useful because it forces you to think about the trade-off. What if you hit 187,000 by 35 instead? Well, now you have 30 years until 65. So, that same 187,000 grows to about 1.4 million. Not quite 2 million, but you're most of the way there. Or maybe you push until 40 and hit 300,000 invested. From there, compounding gets you to 2.3 million by 65. You overshot your goal and bought yourself even more flexibility. The psychological power of Coast Fire is massive. You're not just saving blindly, hoping it works out someday. You're targeting a specific milestone that fundamentally changes your relationship with work. Once you hit your Coast Fire number, you're not desperate for the paycheck anymore. You're not stuck in a job you hate because you need the income to fund your retirement accounts. You're choosing to work because it adds value to your life, not because you have to. I've watched this play out with people I know. One guy hit his Coast Fire number at 38, then took a job teaching high school math, paid half what his corporate job did, but he loved it. Didn't matter. His retirement was locked in. Another woman hit her number at 42, then started a nonprofit that barely paid her a salary. She could do that because she'd front-loaded the suffering. She'd hit critical mass. The wheel was spinning. Coast Fire is essentially you choosing your crossover point deliberately and then walking away. You're saying, I'm going to grind until my portfolio hits critical mass and then I'm done. I'm letting compounding take over. It's the ultimate expression of understanding how wealth actually builds. You front-load the effort when your time and energy are high, and then you let mathematics do the rest. The beauty is you can adjust the numbers to fit your situation. Want 3 million by 65? Your Coast Fire number at 30 is 280,000. Want to retire at 60 instead? Your number goes up. Want to coast starting at 35 instead of 30? Your number drops. The framework adapts, but the core insight stays the same. Hit critical mass early, then let compounding carry you home. So, let's talk about the milestones along the way. The moments that remind you compounding is working, and you're not just throwing money into a void. First, $10,000 invested. This might not sound huge, but it's massive psychologically. When you're starting out, you're saving $50 a week, or maybe 10% of your paycheck, and it feels like you're getting nowhere. Then one day, you check your account, and it says $10,000. That's real money. That's proof your efforts are paying off. You should absolutely celebrate that milestone, because it's the first time you realize this whole investing thing might actually work. The wheel has started to move. First 100,000. This is the milestone Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett obsess over. They call it the hardest 100,000 you ever make, but also the most important, and they're right. Once you hit 6 figures invested, compounding starts to feel real. Let's say you get to 100,000, and then we have a year like 2024 where the S&P 500 returns 25%. Your portfolio just grew by $25,000. That's more than most people save in an entire year. That's when you start to understand what momentum actually means. The wheel is picking up speed, the crossover point when portfolio growth exceeds contributions. We've been talking about this the whole video, but it deserves to be on the milestone list because it's a psychological shift. This is when you look at your annual statement and realize the market added more to your account than you did. Your money is officially working harder than you are. And that moment hits differently for everyone depending on how much you save. But when it happens, you feel it. The burden shifts. You're no longer the only one pulling the cart. The wheel is spinning on its own. When your portfolio generates more in a year than your job pays you. This one is wild. I remember explaining this concept to someone in their 20s who was making $40,000 a year. They said, "That never happens. That's not even realistic." But here's the thing. It absolutely happens if you stay in the game long enough. When you have $1 million invested, and the market returns 10%. That's $100,000 in growth. If your salary is $80,000, your portfolio just out-earned you. And that's not luck. That's mathematics. That's the wheel spinning faster than you can push it, hitting your coast fire number. This is when you know you could stop saving altogether, and compounding would carry you to your goal. You might keep contributing anyway, but there's incredible relief in knowing you don't have to. The pressure is off. You've reached escape velocity. 1 times your annual income saved. Fidelity loves this benchmark. They say by your 30s, you should have 1 times your annual income invested. It's a solid target that puts you ahead of most people and sets you up for a comfortable retirement. $1 million invested. Look, there's nothing magical about $1 million in practical terms. Inflation has chipped away at its significance, but culturally, it's still LA marker. It's still fun to hit that round number and see an extra comma in your account. Just make sure you're chasing goals that actually matter to you, not just what society says is important. When your portfolio covers your basic living expenses, this is a huge milestone for peace of mind. When your portfolio generates enough annually to cover housing, transportation, healthcare, the essentials, you're not covering luxuries yet, but you have security. If you lost your job tomorrow, your portfolio would keep you alive. That's your first real taste of financial freedom. When your portfolio covers your entire lifestyle, including luxuries, this is the traditional retirement vision. Your portfolio generates enough to cover everything: housing, food, transportation, vacations, the life you actually want to live. For most people, this takes decades, but once you're here, you've made it. When you work because you want to, not because you have to. This is the ultimate milestone. Your portfolio sustains your lifestyle completely, but maybe you keep working anyway, not for the paycheck, for meaning, for legacy, for something bigger than money. That's when you know you've won the game. Here's the thing about the crossover point. There's no single magic number where this happens for everyone. It depends entirely on your situation, your savings rate, and what the market does. And understanding these variables is how you figure out where you actually stand. If you save more each year, your contributions matter for longer. Let's say you're an aggressive saver putting away $40,000 annually instead of $20,000. Well, at that rate, it might take until your portfolio hits $600,000 to $800,000 before compounding becomes the primary driver. You're contributing so much that even a 7% return on $500,000, which is $35,000, still gets dwarfed by your $40,000 contributions. You're the engine for a longer stretch of the journey. The wheel needs more momentum before it can carry itself. But if you save less each year, compounding becomes meaningful sooner. Say you're putting away $10,000 annually. Once your portfolio hits $150,000 to $250,000, that 7% return starts outpacing what you're adding. Your contributions matter, but compounding takes over faster because the bar is lower. The wheel reaches critical speed sooner. Then there's the return variable. If the market grows faster or slower, the tipping point shifts. This one's intuitive. If you're capturing 8% returns instead of 7%, compounding accelerates. Your portfolio grows faster, which means it reaches that critical mass where growth exceeds contributions sooner. But if you're only capturing 5% returns, maybe because you're more conservative or the market's been rough, the crossover point gets delayed. It takes longer for your portfolio to grow enough to outpace your contributions. This is why you can't just copy someone else's plan and expect the same results. Your crossover point is unique to you. It's shaped by how much you earn, how much you save, how you invest, and what the market does over the years you're invested. I spent over 10 years running my own business, surrounded by accountants and fiscal lawyers who taught me how money actually moves. And one thing I learned is that most financial mistakes aren't math problems. They're brain problems. People don't understand how their own decision-making works. They don't understand how compounding works psychologically. They think in linear terms when wealth builds exponentially. They panic when the market drops, selling at the bottom, destroying years of compounding. They chase returns, buying high and selling low, sabotaging the wheel before it can spin. And here's the bigger truth. Investing spans decades. If you only focus on the massive milestones, like retirement or hitting $1 million, you're going to lose motivation. Those goals are so far away that they don't feel real. But if you're willing to celebrate the smaller wins along the way, The first 10,000, the first 100,000, the crossover point where compounding starts pulling its weight, you stay engaged. You stay excited. You keep going. Wealth isn't built by one paycheck or one lucky year. It's built by time, consistency, and compounding quietly working in the background. The crossover point isn't just a mathematical curiosity. It's the moment you realize the system is working. Your money is finally working harder than you are. And once you hit that point, everything changes. Let me give you a concrete example. A real scenario with actual numbers, so this isn't just theory. Meet Tom. He's 45 years old, makes $120,000 a year, and he's been contributing $25,000 annually to his retirement accounts for the past 12 years. His portfolio is sitting at $450,000. He's exhausted. He's thinking about slowing down, maybe taking a less stressful job that pays $90,000, but gives him his life back. The question is, can he afford to stop investing and coast? Or does he need to keep grinding? Let's run the numbers. If Tom keeps contributing $25,000 per year at 7% returns, he'll hit $1.5 million by the time he's 60. That's 15 years of continued grinding. But what if he stops contributing today at $450,000? At 7%, that $450,000 grows to $1.25 million by the time he's 60. He's giving up $250,000 in exchange for 15 years of breathing room and a lower stress life. Is that worth it for Tom? Maybe. Depends on his goals, his health, his family situation. But here's what's important. At $450,000, Tom is very close to his crossover point. His portfolio is generating about $31,500 per year in growth at 7%, which is already more than he was contributing annually before. The wheel is in. He's not the primary driver anymore. If Tom takes that $90,000 job and just stops investing altogether, he'll still retire with over $1 million. Not as much as if he kept grinding, but enough. And he bought himself 15 years of lower stress, more time with his family, and the psychological relief of knowing his retirement is handled. That's the trade-off. That's the crossover point in action. It's not about maxing out every possible dollar. It's about understanding when you have enough momentum that you can choose to ease off without destroying your future. What 99% of people do is usually what not to do. They keep grinding out of fear, not strategy. They don't understand the math, so they assume they have to maximize contributions until 65. But the math tells a different story. So, here's what you actually do with this information. 3 practical takeaways. First, calculate your personal crossover point. Take your current portfolio value, multiply it by your expected annual return, and compare it to your annual contributions. Are you close? Have you already passed it? If you're not there yet, what number do you need to hit before compounding takes over? That's your target. That's what you're working toward. Second, decide if Coastfire makes sense for you. If you're in your 30s or early 40s, and you can front-load your contributions aggressively for 5 to 10 years, you might be able to hit your Coastfire number and fundamentally change your relationship with work. Run the math. Figure out what number you need at your current age to coast to your retirement goal. If it's realistic, consider grinding hard now so you can coast later. Third, celebrate the milestones along the way. Investing is a multi-decade journey. If you only focus on the finish line, you'll burn out. But if you mark the wins, the first 10,000, the first 100,000, the crossover point. You say 10,000, 100,000, the crossover point. Motivated, you stay in the game. And staying in the game is 90% of winning. The exact moment you no longer need to invest for retirement isn't 65. It's not some arbitrary age. It's the moment your portfolio grows faster than you can save. For most people, contributing $20,000 to $30,000 per year, that happens somewhere between $300,000 and $600,000 invested. Once you hit that zone, you're coasting. Whether you realize it or not, the wheel is spinning. Compounding has taken over. You're just along for the ride, and the sooner you realize that, the sooner you can stop grinding out of fear and start making choices based on what you actually want your life to look like. Because at the end of the day, money is a tool, and the crossover point is when you realize the tool is working without you having to hold it anymore.